Hare Krishna. I was asked to say a few words about the perfection of yoga in celebration of Books Are the Basis Week. So it's interesting for me because the perfection of yoga was the first book that I bought, got actually, but it was part of three. I got the perfection of yoga, the Bhagavad Gita, and the science of self-realization. It was the science of self-realization that I read first, and actually that was an inspiration to reading the other books. Then I looked at the other two books, and I thought, well, Perfection of Yoga is quite small in comparison to the Bhagavad Gita, so therefore I dived into the Perfection of Yoga. Um, and when I did that, it was quite amazing actually, and it really inspired me to read the Bhagavad Gita. Not least because it answered so many questions for me. And one of the first things, it wasn't so much a question, but one of the first things I read in the first few pages was when Prabhupada said that something like the Bhagavad Gita took at the utmost just 1 hour to speak or to sing. And I thought, wow, it's amazing. Now obviously, we know the 700 verses in the Bhagavad Gita. So that was just interesting because it was a spontaneous dialogue. But, for such an incredible book that has, lasted for so long, sort of 5,000 years, et cetera, it's just quite incredible that that spontaneous conversation on the middle of a battlefield took just 1 hour. And then even before that, I noticed the chapter names in the Perfection of Yoga, and they really caught my eye because they were almost like statements that you just had to get more information about. So the first thought or question I had was, why did Arjuna reject yoga? And again, that was answered almost immediately by Srila Prabhupada. And he talked about when Arjuna learned about the meditational system of yoga and how to sit down and how to keep the body straight and how to keep the eyes half closed and how to gaze at the tip of the nose and all of that without diverting one's attention and doing all this in a secluded place. I kind of thought to myself, oh my God, I wouldn't be able to do that. And then Prabhupada quotes Arjuna from the Bhagavad Gita saying, O Madhusudana, which Prabhupada explains is a reference to the demon Madhu. So Arjuna was wanting Krishna to slay his demon of doubt. Doubts, of course, is something that we all have. So, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you've given me, or which you've summarized, it appears impractical and unendurable to me, for the mind is restless and unsteady. And it was just like as if Arjuna was speaking for me. It was just absolutely fantastic. And then, it went on to further questions, and they were all answered really in very quick succession. I mean, Srila Prabhupada is just brilliant the way that he writes, and answers all those questions. It's just so incredible. But explaining yoga and devotion, and Prabhupada goes on to explain that, and he totally dismantles the notion that yoga is some kind of inactive process or simply breathing or stretching exercises. Rather, he makes it crystal clear that the perfect beginning for our yoga journey is devotional yoga, to engage in active service, informing us that we will automatically know when we are entering or have reached the higher stages of the yoga ladder, if you like, and gone beyond the initial stage. I think he quotes something like, when we work in Krishna consciousness, when we chant Hare Krishna, engage in devotional service 24 hours a day and never get tired. So when I read that, I could understand that I have a long way to go. And to be honest with you, 45 years later, I still know I have a long way to go. Then Prabhupada talks about controlling the mind and making it our friend, and that verse in Bhagavad Gita, Udared Atmanatmanam Natmanam Ugashadayet, that the mind is either our greatest friend or our worst enemy. So powerful, so powerful. So obviously we wanted to know, or I wanted to know, how to make our mind a friend rather than an enemy, because Prabhupada explains that will free us then from duality and designation, arguably the biggest impediments to understanding who we really are. And then Srila Prabhupada quotes Chanakya Pandit in that regard, and says something like, no one is anyone's friend and no one is anyone's enemy. It's only about behavior that one can understand who his friend is and who his enemy is. So yeah, designation and reputation, etc., are not the criteria to base anything on. Rather, the key determining factor, the key determining criteria is how we and others behave, essentially the Acharya principle that Srila Prabhupada, was the primary exponent of. And then, just in case anyone was wondering or even fearful, and I certainly would have been, about taking to the path of devotional life, of bhakti yoga, and then running into difficulties, running into problems. My fear, and I'm sure everyone's fear, is just simply melt away with a reassurance from Srila Prabhupada that he says it's not unusual. I know Srila Prabhupada once said that when someone left and devotees reported it, Prabhupada, don't be surprised. We should not be surprised at those who leave devotional service. We should be surprised at those who stay. So Prabhupada was explaining in the Perfection of Yoga that it's not unusual for one to fall down from the platform of devotional service, because sometimes a beginner or a neophyte, we can't keep to the rules and regulations. Sometimes we yield, I think Prabhupada said. Sometimes we might yield to intoxication or illicit sex life, etc., which are impediments on the path of yoga, no doubt about it. But then Prabhupada quotes Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita when he responds to that very point and says, my devotee will never be lost, and you will continue your journey in your next life, etc. But in the Perfection of Yoga, Srila Prabhupada says something even more powerful, at least for me, even more powerful, that he says that if one sincerely cultivates only 1% worth of spiritual knowledge, that they will never fall down into Maya, into the material whirlpool, I think is the phrase that he uses. So yeah, reading all this, at such an early stage as well in my devotional journey, it was really a win-win for me, because even if we stumble and fall, we'll not be lost. And simply by retaining a desire to continue on that journey, we will eventually reach the perfection of yoga, that final link in the yoga chain, that final link that results in us being eternally bound in a loving, blissful relationship with Lord Sri Krishna via devotional service or bhakti yoga, which really is the very top rung of the yoga ladder, or simply put, it's the perfection of yoga. I really felt blessed that I chose to read the Perfection of Yoga before the Bhagavad Gita, as it helped me so much then to absorb the multitude of magical messages within the Bhagavad Gita. So if you haven't already done so, I'd really urge you to read the Perfection of Yoga. And if you have read it, and if you've read it more than once, I would urge you to read it again. Such a fantastic book. But of course, I would say that about all of Srila Prabhupada's books. But yeah, this really is an absolutely fantastic book. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, and have a wonderful Books is the Basic week. Jai.